Obviously, being an auditor, there are regulatory pressures and there are pressures to make on profits. And profits are impacted largely in South Africa by, obviously, there's internationally softer commodity prices. I think in South African context, it's obviously offset by a stronger rand. But the rand is so volatile, I think the challenge really comes to CFO and saying, on the one hand, I have to deal with at year end with impairments and getting questions from a regulator, should I have impaired last year, and so forth. And then obviously looking at their long-term planning and saying, well, we want to invest new capital. Capital is obviously scarce. So really I need to make the right decision in which project I'm going to invest, because to make sure that the company survives going forward. So I think it's very important now in the boardroom, sort of you have a business decision versus a financial decision. So I think capital is one of the key considerations. Commodity price, obviously all the companies are looking and saying, what is the forecast holding for sort of short term, next year, and then obviously longer term, sort of 3 years. What is the horizon looking at? What is demand going to be? So depending on which commodity they are, I think demand plays a huge role. Something like gold, for instance, wouldn't necessarily have a commodity. That's more international economic factors, like what does the US dollar do, the EU, what are their plans, what's happening in Greece, and so forth. So I think a lot of play, I think a lot of interesting board discussions around how we see that forecast and what the price decks they're going to use to either look at the impairment of their current assets, or then what are they going to use their capital going forward. So I think that's one. Then I think unique to South Africa is secondly is obviously we have challenges around infrastructure. I mean, you would read in the papers every day that Eskom is doing load shedding, then it's Schedule 1, then it's Schedule 3, and I think they've gone through the process where they are saying this is not going to be 3 months and we're done. They've now publicly come out and stated that they are going to have a extended period of maintenance. The other question is also how quickly can they bring the other power stations online, which will obviously then alleviate some of the pressures on our power grid. But I think that impacts on mining. I think a broader South African economy also has an impact. The other important point is around SLPs. So we all know this year is the year which the DMR is going to come around and sort of look and say, well, you previously agreed that you're going to do X, Y, and Z. Have you achieved those targets? Yes and no. And then obviously they're going to negotiate a new SLP. But I think what plays a huge role is the community around that, or the municipality, because that's effectively you entering in the contract. Obviously the DMR controls it, but effectively it's that municipality saying, we either need water supply, or we need electricity, or we need schools, or we need teachers to be trained, whatever their specific need is. And that varies depending on where you are in the country. But I think that's another hurdle which the companies have to face. And obviously all of these things cost money. So that's another capital consideration for management to have a look at and say, are we going to spend capital? What are we going to spend it on? What makes sense? Because obviously that now impacts our workers. And I think it's part of the bigger package, because you then have labor unrest where not just the workers but the community around that gets involved in saying we think the mine should be doing more.